Welcome to Victoria Rumble Room, a show on the West Coast that endeavors to really try to deliver you the goods on national, local, international issues, all sorts of different things. I'm Robin Adair, and we try to be objective on this show. And speaking of objectivity, the object I'm talking about is the Croatian sensation himself, John Jurisic. And John, as usual, so much going on.
Howdy doody, Robin. Good morning.
And one of the things I thought I'd bring up right off the top, because it's a concern, is this Omicron breakup, this terrible variant of COVID-19. I say it's terrible because so many people are getting it. Not that many people in the hospital. I don't think there's that many deaths, but it's really rampant. It's all over the place, John. And I'm really hoping that this thing is addressed soon. I know I'm getting my vaccination. I hope other people are, but I'm worried that we are going to have this for a long, long time.
It feels, I agree with you, first of all. I also feel a ton of people are getting it. And it feels nowadays like the flu or like a cold. And I think that is how it will be for us. Every fall or whatever, there's just going to be therefore, you just absolutely have to get vaccinated to protect yourselves and to protect others. And with that sort of precaution, then we will get through this. But let's talk about yet another big story. It's really quite remarkable, the news environment we're living in these days. Another story that the world is focused on, that being the war in Ukraine. It really looks like the Ukrainians are winning. I mean, I almost don't want to admit that. It will be such a good feeling, as they clearly are pushing Russians easily out of their territory. The Ukrainians are in Kherson Oblast and driving disorganized, demoralized Russians out of the village rather easily, almost like a junior high teacher herding kids out of the gym. It's quite shocking that these global armies are reacting in this behavior. Is it the beginning of the end of this conflict, Robin? It's hard to believe. It's really hard to believe that Russia is finished.
Well, Vladimir Putin is not somebody to sit back and admit defeat. And he's just annexed 4 areas of Ukraine, announced that they are now part of Russia. And he's trying to make all of this sound somehow like a victory. He had a big victory celebration in Moscow, and it's kind of hard to believe that people are buying in on that. So what's the deal with Vladimir Putin? What's the guy really like? Well, as it happens in Victoria, we have the good fortune of having somebody who has met him on a number of occasions. And we are talking about Jeremy Kinsman, for 15 years, a senior diplomat, a Canadian diplomat and ambassador. He was also, among his many ambassadorial positions, ambassador to the Russian Federation, where he met Vladimir Putin on a number of occasions. He's agreed to come on the program. We're very pleased about this, so let's zoom him in. Now joining us for the first time in the Victoria Rumble Room is Jeremy Kinsman. He is a former diplomat. He's also a lecturer, an author, and a TV analyst who happens to live in Victoria, and it's great to have you on the show.
Well, it's great to be with you. Thank you.
Now, Jeremy, you were a Canadian ambassador for 15 years, and included in your many roles, you were an ambassador to the Russian Federation. I understand you actually have met Vladimir Putin. And so my first question, do you think the Russians at the minute are playing chicken with all of this mobilization, while apparently they seem to be losing the Ukrainian conflict? Do you think Putin believes that he's actually losing, or is he as reckless as he comes off?
He's a very curious guy. I think he's actually a lot of different guys. And as he's grown older, some aspects of that multiple personality have come to dominate. I think when I met him, when he was a vice mayor of St. Petersburg, he was projecting himself, I think in his view, possibly sincerely, as a Democrat, as a participant in the new Russia. I mean, it was only 2 or 3 years old, and he was pretty convincing at it. A lot of Russians were convincing because they're intelligent, they're educated, they get the vocabulary, they master the lines, but it's not part of their sort of basic makeup. And the real Russian underneath very often surges in moments of stress and contradicts all the pretty words. And I think that would describe to some extent his experience over the next 20 years.
He created a lot of this stress himself, though, didn't he?
No, I don't think Putin created stress. I think Putin, to get back to what you were talking about before, Putin has always been anything but reckless. He is very careful. He won his reputation by getting things done. He has had an enormous pride in always delivering what he promises, whether it's to a boss or indeed whether it's to the Russian people. Initially, his promises were pretty straightforward and pretty obvious. Russia was in chaos. David Remnick, who had been in Moscow when I was there with the Washington Post, referred to it as the wreckage of everyday life. It was awful. It had hit the pits because Russia was being turned upside down and they didn't know how to do it. And we were purporting to give them advice, and we weren't placed to understand their situation. Nobody was. And so it was chaos. Chaos, and people lost their savings, and Yeltsin spiraled downward, unable to control events, handed to Putin, who basically said that in his opening speech as president, very short, he only made one policy promise, and that was to protect democracy, which, of course, he has offended over the years. But he sought from Russians a deal, a bargain. You shut up, quiet down. Russia's seen enough revolution in its life. You do that, and I will bring back order and stability. And he did. He did with the benefit, the aid, enormous aid of a real uptick in the price of oil, which facilitated a lot of things. But Russian incomes have multiplied by a factor of 5 in those intervening 20 years. People are vastly better off in the main than they ever have been in history. And up until a few years ago, when he went sour on the public, because the public had gone sour on him. But he began to deviate as a person, really toward theories and concepts that were way out of his lane normally. He was a person, as I said, who got things done. Instead, he began to do more than dabble in fairly deep, far out, and rather spiritually based philosophy. The Eurasian strain in Russian thought, the strain that preaches Russia as a Slavic capital. They talk about the Ruski Mir, the Russian world, a different way of thinking, orthodox, conservative, family-based. And in the words of some of these, I'd call them philosophers or polemicists, basically anti-Western.
If I could just interrupt a fascinating stream. Thank you. Such an honor to have you on the program. We've noted that you were ambassador to the European Union. You were also once High Commissioner to the UK. So you're very familiar, therefore, with some of the major players supporting the Ukrainians with training and weapons. Are you surprised that NATO has united so quickly behind this former Soviet nation?
I don't think that they've been united behind Ukraine, if that's what you're saying.
Yes.
But I think that the galvanizing force in that unification is the acknowledgement that they have to unite behind the global norm, post-Second World norm, against the invasion by one country of another. That is what is at stake here. If that norm, if Russia were permitted to succeed in their original announced intention, simply of absorbing Ukraine, if they were permitted to succeed in doing that, the post-World War norm, which in the end was the trophy for which however many millions of people died between 1939 and 45, would simply be trashed. That's what they're fighting behind. Of course, they are fighting for Ukraine too. Biden has frequently referred to this, particularly at the beginning, as a fight between democracy and autocracy. It is true that Russia is increasingly an autocracy, no question. And Ukraine is an aspiring, if highly imperfect, democracy. And so that gets our support, of course. But I don't think that alone would have got our complete support in throwing ourselves behind an effort which is this winter and over time going to have very serious costs, particularly in Western European and Eastern European economies, and also, as we can see, has a ripple effect, which is having global costs on food and energy pricing everywhere, and all of those things connecting to an inflationary spiral.
Now you're reaching into my next question here is about the fact we have, I believe it's 500 refugees from Ukraine on Vancouver Island. We have thousands across the country. We have, I think, millions of Ukrainians have actually left Ukraine and are waiting anxiously to come home. Are you projecting that this conflict could go through the winter? Do you think that Putin's strategy now perhaps is to try to freeze out the opposition a little bit, and we get so desperate out here in the West because of, as you say, rising fuel prices and other expenses that maybe we're going to put more pressure on Zelensky to get to the negotiation table?
Well, there's no question that that's his strategy. His strategy has been from the outset that he can win the long war. He believes, I think, beyond the point of where this belief is justified, that famous Russian resilience will carry them through. I mean, at one point, I think he said they'd eat grass if they have to. I think he's wrong about that. Russians have become used to being a developed economy with distribution of benefits to many people. But his view is that Western countries, democracies, and thinking particularly Western European, are basically frail. He has looked. They've interpreted the election win by Giorgia Meloni in Italy as being a big plus for them. Orban is a big plus for them. Mm-hmm. They think that's the way it's going. So he thinks with time on his side, because he has energy, he has $625 billion in US cash reserves. He thinks all this will work for him. And meanwhile, he can reconfigure his military. He can call up the reserves. They're partly trained and train them. But it's, he's pushing the same fantasy. And this is where you enter the autocratic world. This is this guy. He is one of the most competitive people I've ever met. You sense this when you deal with him. He is going to win whatever he starts. And our anticipation as to what he would do if he were on the back foot, facing losses of the kind he's faced in Kharkiv. Most analysts who think seriously about the guy thought he would double down. That's what he's done. He's doubled down as sort of a trifecta. He's taken these oblasts in eastern, the four regions in the Donbass to have these phony referenda. And with this sort of nuclear illusions, to try to sow disquiet among Ukrainians and among people in the West. Vis-a-vis the Ukrainians, it's having absolutely the opposite effect, of course. And the one thing Zelensky has done that is so sensational is that he has brought a disunited country into more or less complete unity. The guy had a 23% approval rating in February, and he's got something like 92 today. But I think he is now probably hedging a bit his bets. He is trying, he cannot simply say, oh, I made a mistake, I'm pulling back, and survive. Okay? And if he can't survive, all the people around him aren't going to survive. And so there's going to be a tremendous impetus in that community of self-defense because they know they can't give up. He has to deliver something that he can present to the Russian people as a win.
Such an interesting guest, from the Chris Kilford network. We're so lucky that Chris is talking to us regularly and suggesting these extraordinary speakers. I mean, how often do you have a Canadian ambassador to Russia, available to be interviewed on a show like the Rumble Room? But we did. And he has a lot more to say, and we'll feature more of Jeremy Kinsman on upcoming shows. So that's the scene internationally, Robin, okay? That's the global scene, as we always cover the globe. Let's swing things now over to the local front, okay?
Yeah, we're going to move around on local stuff. And when we say local, let's start sort of with Canada first, where we just had a big Quebec provincial election and a nationalist party thundering to a huge victory, massive victory, overwhelming. And this is a party that stands for French first rights, and they really don't want to see English in the province of Quebec. They're nationalists. They say they're not separatists. Let's hope it stays that way. The Parti Québécois has almost disappeared in Quebec. Let's hope that this is as far as this goes. It's always interesting to see what happens in the province of Quebec because it affects all of us in so many ways. And also, John, it's interesting to see what's been going on with other situations in British Columbia.
Well, I see the BC government is now getting ready to add more seats in the legislature. And generally when we hear that, we're thinking Vancouver or Kelowna or, exploding. No, 2 seats are coming for Langford. It's actually happening in our backyard, which really shows that particular area of the island, what they call West Shore in general, is really the fastest growing place on the island, if not in Canada. And all of this, Robin, coming just days ahead of the next municipal election. I think races in Victoria and Saanich and Langford, for that matter, every municipality in the city, all 88 of them, will be fascinating when the votes are in. I just hope people get out and vote. Exercise your franchise. Get out and vote.
It's a big problem because in municipalities, traditionally, it's 30, 33, 34% of people get out and vote municipally, which allows radical people and radical organizations to get their block of votes out and get arguably inappropriate people into senior offices. And I don't know if you can sort of brand all the people that get in because they come from small interest groups, but I don't think it's healthy. I think it's healthy to have people in there that are open to all points of view and are willing to work in a municipal fashion, not in a party block. So we're hoping to see that in ridings and in areas like Victoria and Saanich. So we'll have to, we'll keep a very close eye on the municipal election. And, I also wanted to just touch on what's going on with our healthcare system. Health Minister Adrian Dix held a media conference, laid out a 70-point plan where he's looking at trying to fix the doctor shortage, fix the healthcare crisis. We don't have enough nurses. We don't have enough doctors. We have these centers that are open that are empty. There's all these problems, and Mr. Dix is trying to offer solutions, including allowing pharmacists to renew prescriptions without a note from a doctor, which is kind of radical. Also expanding the whole idea of virtual care through TELUS and other companies where you can go online to get your doctor appointment. And there's been concerns raised about this. One of the people raising those concerns is Dr. Jennifer Lush. And we've had her on the program before. She's been very active with BC Healthcare Matters, who are having a rally again on the 22nd of October, John. And we asked her for her reaction to the 70-point plan. And Jennifer Lush is now with us. Let's zoom her in. And now joining us in the Victoria Rumble Room, once again, is Victoria Dr. Jennifer Lush. And it's great to have you back on the program.
Good morning, Robin and John. Thanks so much for having me back.
Now, in making an announcement, a 70-point plan to tackle BC's healthcare problems, Minister Adrian Dix proclaimed that the plan was the future of healthcare. But, we didn't really hear much about what was going on at present, in the sense that there's a lot of things that have to happen immediately for a lot of people. For example, Mr. Dix didn't talk about 1 million British Columbians who currently don't have a family doctor, nor the high attrition rate of doctors and nurses in the province. So overall, what was your reaction?
Well, I suppose the positive angle is that the government has come out with a document that shows they are committed to investing in healthcare, which is important both now and in the future. So, I was glad in that sense. But you're absolutely right. There was little in this document that sort of addressed the current crisis we find ourselves in. We are losing nurses, and the short staffing situation in the hospitals is dire. And the million, probably plus now, people without a family doctor can't wait until new medical students graduate, in 2028 and beyond, to access care. They need strategies that will allow them to access care now. And we need very real strategies that will stop this crisis getting any worse. So along with recruiting more family doctors, we need to invest in primary care as delivered by individual family doctors in the community now, so that we can continue caring for British Columbians and we don't end up with a crisis that's worse than the one we're currently in.
Dr. Lush, it's great to get your perspective on this important issue. One headline-grabbing item in this new plan is the ability of pharmacists to renew prescriptions independent of a doctor's note. This could relieve some of the pressure for those of us, or some of us without a doctor, but is there a downside? Is your thoughts?
I think potentially there could be very significant downsides. Now, I absolutely agree with you. For those without a family doctor, this will definitely make life a little bit easier, in that they can access their prescription renewals without having to go to an emergency room at 3 a.m. or line up for 3 hours outside a UPCC. So for those without a family doctor, I think it provides a temporary stopgap. But the reality is we wouldn't need stopgap measures if we would address the root cause, which is that we do not have enough family doctors in the community in BC. And so rather than coming up with piecemeal solutions, the government really needs to invest in community family medicine, which would then restore primary care to people, and the issue about prescription renewals would become a non-issue. There are definitely inherent risks in having pharmacists prescribe medications. I have great respect for my pharmacy colleagues. Let me say that right off the cuff. They are important members of the team. However, pharmacists themselves, I think, will tell you they are not trained in diagnosis. They do not have the ability to order investigations to monitor appropriate blood tests to determine if a medication is safe to continue with. So certainly if we're going to have our pharmacists prescribing, I think there need to be very clear guidelines. It needs to be done very thoughtfully. And I would argue that pharmacists and physicians should work together to come up with what those guidelines for safe prescribing might be.
They've talked a lot about the fact there's more doctors coming into the system, but there's no real detail about how many of these new doctors that are coming in are going to end up being family doctors. And another thing is they're talking about the fact that the new teleservices, the virtual services for medicine are reaching in to help a lot of people in an immediate way. So it means you can go in and see a doctor and get a diagnosis on the phone or on your computer screen. What's the downside to that?
That's one of my biggest concerns with the plan is the commitment to increasing telehealth. Now, telehealth has a very valuable role to play in the context of a relationship with a family doctor who looks after you long term. But telehealth, where there is no underlying longitudinal relationship, tends to be a much more expensive way of delivering healthcare, and it leads to poorer outcomes for patients. Telehealth doctors don't have the ability to do a physical exam as part of their consults, so they will tend to order more investigations and refer more quickly to specialists, which ultimately is costing the healthcare system more. So I think we need to, again, be very thoughtful in how we increase our use of telehealth. It makes sense in the context of a longitudinal relationship with a family doctor, but it is not a substitute for that relationship. With regard to the increasing enrollment in medical schools and building new medical schools, sure, that sounds great initially. However, that's certainly not an immediate solution to the crisis. We have 4 years of medical school plus, a minimum of 2 years of residency before we're going to see any fruits of those investments. And finally, those medical students are not going to choose community family medicine if we don't fix the dysfunctional system we currently have. They will choose other career paths, which is exactly what we're seeing with doctors currently. So let's fix the flaws in the system first, and then we'll be able to train more doctors and recruit them into community family medicine.
Thank you. Mr. Dix talked about the province opening its doors to foreign nurses, but there was no mention of allowing foreign-trained doctors into the system. Why is this a step too far for this government? BC has turned to foreign-trained physicians in the past.
Well, I struggle a bit with the idea of recruiting foreign nurses and recruiting foreign doctors just ethically, because I wonder, where are we recruiting them from and what are we doing for those countries where we're recruiting them from, right? So perhaps we need to look within and try to come up with Canadian solutions rather than pillaging other countries. But that being said, certainly easing, restrictions to ensure that we, smooth the way for nurses and doctors from other jurisdictions to come into the province. Absolutely. BC is known for having one of the most fraught licensing requirements. The College of Physicians and Surgeons of BC makes it very difficult for physicians from other provinces, never mind other countries, to come into BC and work. And there are many who have said to me, I did it once, but I won't do it again. Or, had I known what the licensing was like, I wouldn't recommend it. And I'll certainly tell all my colleagues not to come. So maybe the college needs to look at that and refine its licensing requirements so that, we're able to get help more readily from those who do want to come to BC. But again, it's a little bit like the medical students. We can invite foreign doctors in and we can smooth their licensing requirements. But if we don't fix this dysfunctional system, these professionals from other countries are not going to want to do community family medicine any more than Canadian trained doctors. So again, it comes back to investing in longitudinal primary care as delivered by family doctors in the community.
And of course, there are Canadians who are training overseas in Ireland and the UK and other parts of the world who are getting medical training, who are having a tough time coming back to practice medicine in Canada too. So that's another category. It's not necessarily just foreign doctors, it's foreign trained doctors as well, right?
Correct. Yeah. And we need to certainly welcome back those Canadians who have trained overseas and maybe want to come back and practice at home. We need to smooth the licensing. We also need to ensure it's a welcoming practice environment. We live in an area that has one of the highest costs of living. And so we need to make sure that the compensation they're going to be offered is going to allow them to, practice and be afford to have a clinic and look after patients, because that is something that currently family doctors are really struggling with. We want to take care of British Columbians, but we simply, the business model under the current compensation is just not sustainable.
I just want to mention that the doctors of British Columbia are negotiating right now with the government for the overall contract. And maybe some of these questions that you've brought up today will be addressed in that. I guess we're waiting to see what comes out of that. Are you very optimistic that a future negotiation between government and the doctors at this level could answer some of these immediate questions? Maybe this 70-point plan is just the first step and there's a lot more good news still to come around the corner.
Well, I certainly hope that's the case. Doctors of BC has said that primary care is one of its, main mandates that needs to be worked on, and I appreciate that. The government has said that they value now the role of the family doctors, so I hope that they will stand behind their words and come forth with a sustainable and a fair compensation model for family doctors. But I would say to both Doctors of BC and the provincial government, again, we are in a very real crisis, and we do need real and sustainable and long-lasting supports, and we need them now because there are doctors who are being forced to close their practice every day, and we don't want to leave any more British Columbians without a family doctor.
So great to have Dr. Jennifer Lush on the program, John. She is so interesting. There's sincerity, there's compassion, and that means credibility. And I know her views are shared by many other doctors across the province.
And Robin, BC Healthcare Matters is organizing another public event. There was a very well-attended, well-received event during the summer. And this one is at the BC Legislature on Saturday, October 22nd. I'll be there. I was at the last one. And so will a lot of other concerned British Columbians. Despite all of the noise on everywhere on traditional and digital media, more needs to be done. More people still do not have doctors, and our voices must be heard. And we will vocalize that on October 22nd. Please join us.
Absolutely, John. And we're big supporters of BC Healthcare Matters, and we really want to keep up the whole, the big movement, I guess you could call it, across the province to do something about this. Yeah. I know that the government is trying to make some changes. I know they are moving. 70-point plan cannot be discounted. Mm-hmm. So much more still needs to happen. So I'm glad that we're having this rally. And speaking of voices being heard, I have this little piece that I thought I would bring to your attention, John. I received a note from an old broadcast friend of mine, a fellow by the name of Gilles, who is now retired up on northern Vancouver Island. And Gilles sent me this. It's pretty funny. In fact, I laughed out loud when I saw it. And the video is a police officer somewhere in the United States. He's doing the good deed. He has volunteered to come on television for a pet shelter to find a new home for Pinky the cat. Well, here's what happens.
This is Pinky. He's a male cat, domestic short hair. He's available for adoption. He's pet of the week, Placer County Animal Shelter. He's a very loving cat.
Hang on to this, please. Oh, yeah. Pinky.
Pinky.
Pinky. Whoa. Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Well, we got a wildcat on our hands. Pinky, settle down, bud. Careful, Cole. I get a catch pole. Somebody get a catch pole.
Oh. Pinky.
Just set it over.
No.
Get a catch pole.
Your kids out able to get them?
Yeah, because I'm not going to grab him. Dude.
Okay, start up in the disconnected from the deck.
Where did you get that video from, Robin? Hopefully someone's adopted Pinky by now, and I hope they have lots of insurance. What a hoot. Anyway, we're nearly out of time, unfortunately. God, this is so much fun. Let me tell you again tell the viewers how they can follow the Rumble Room, because they certainly do. And boy, do they ever comment. It's like a torrent of comments. And participate, and they're allowed to participate, and fully do in our brave adventure through our Facebook page, through our Twitter page, through our YouTube site, through our news group Facebook site, through our Instagram site, and through our TikTok site. Okay? And boy, oh boy, clearly somebody's listening to me at the end of every show, because our viewers are getting larger, our comments are getting larger, and our impact is getting larger. So for now, I remain your humble servant, the Croatian sensation, Johnny Juricic.
And I remain Robin Adair, and rumble on.